If I can get everyone's attention, I'm really thrilled to welcome everyone here today. It's a very important occasion. My name is Carl Gershman. I'm the president of the National Endowment for Democracy, and we're just really thrilled to be able to have you here with us today on this very important occasion. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the NED's Democracy Awards ceremony, which this year is taking place, as you all know, on the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Our event this evening is intended as a demonstration of solidarity with the continuing struggle for freedom and democracy in China, but also as an act of remembrance of those Chinese citizens, most of them very young, who gave their lives in the hope that China would become a democratic country respectful of human dignity and the rule of law. We are here to testify that they did not die in vain. I want to thank the many donors who have made this event possible and who are listed in your program, among them NED board members and former board members Eileen Donahoe, Mano Camporis, Marlene Colucci, Michelle Dunn, Bob Tuttle, and George Weigel, the John Herford Foundation, the Bricklayers and Steelworkers Union, the Ambassador Stanley Gao from the Techro office of Taiwan in Washington, and we're grateful to them all. We're also honored to be joined this evening by many members of Congress. Now, I think as some of you have heard, there are votes on, and when you're on the Hill, nothing is well organized. So I've written in my notes because I thought she would be here at this time, but she's coming. Speaker Pelosi will be here, and I just want to say before she gets here that she is, as everyone knows, she's incredibly devoted to the cause of human rights in China and Tibet, as well as Liz Cheney, who is here, the House Republican Conference Chair. Jim McGovern will be joining us, Mike McCall. They're all not here right now. Tom Suozzi, who will be presenting awards this evening, but there'll be some changes. Don't worry, we'll get through this. Chris Smith, I don't know if he's still here, but I saw him. He left? Okay, but we all know Chris. He's a hero in this struggle, and he co-chairs the Tom Lantos Human Rights Caucus with Jim McGovern. John Molinar was supposed to be here, Sheila Jackson-Lee. I just saw French Kill from Louisiana. We just were talking, and thank him. He has a strong interest in human rights. And is former Congressman Frank Wolf here? He was supposed to be here, but I was told that he was going to be here, but okay. Even if he's not here, I want to say that Frank was supposed to be here, and he's a terrific, for more than 30 years, he was a great defender of human rights. And Ileana Ross-Lehtinen, who is a new member of the NED board, another heroine in the fight for human rights, now a member of the NED board, and she was coming in from the airport, and she'll be here. I know she'll be here because, as we all know, nothing stops Ileana. And I want to welcome, where's Weir Kashi? Weir Kashi is somewhere here. There he is, over there. Okay, Weir Kashi, who was one of the key student leaders of the Tiananmen protests, and he took part in the abortive negotiations with Li Peng and other Chinese officials before the Chinese regime chose the path of repression over dialogue. Finally, you'll see on the screens around you, I think they're going to put some signs there, and we've been in touch with our friends in Hong Kong, and they have just held a candlelight vigil attended by 180,000 people. And we're sort of doing this in partnership. So feel yourself connected. And so you have pictures of it there. And this is the only place where Tiananmen Square is recognized and remembered in what is formally today China. And the people in Hong Kong, as we know, are struggling to keep the independence and the rights that they have, even though Ileana, I just talked about you. I talked about you. I said nothing would stop you from getting here because nothing ever stops you. Okay. Ileana, how can you do anything without Ileana? The 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen massacre takes place at a moment when Americans and others around the world have come to the realization that China's dramatic economic growth has not produced a more liberal and open country as so many people hoped that it would, but rather a more closed and increasingly repressive authoritarian state that poses a growing danger to democracy around the world. The late Chinese dissident and Nobel laureate Liu Xiaobo foresaw this danger, and he warned about it, and for that he paid a very, very heavy price, as we know. His message to us was that it is in the vital interest of all democratic countries and freedom-loving people to rescue the world's largest hostage population from enslavement. Within that hostage population, no groups are more threatened than those represented here this evening by our three awardees. The Tibetan and Uyghur peoples. Notice that I don't call them minorities, I call them peoples, because they are peoples. Who are victims of what the Dalai Lama has called cultural genocide, and religious believers among the Han majority, especially the house church movement and the rural Christian underground. The fact that each of these groups faces a common existential threat to its culture, its language, its identity, and its faith reveals what is the central feature of the Chinese state, that it sees anything it cannot control as a threat to its power. Such a system is inherently insecure and unstable, which calls to mind Ronald Reagan's statement in his Westminster address, which was the address that launched the NED, that the innate human desire for freedom will leave such a closed and repressive system. As he said at the time, 1982, he was talking about Marxism-Leninism and the Soviet Union, on the ash heap of history, as it has left other tyrannies which stifle the freedom and muzzle the self-expression of the people. As difficult as conditions are today, we must never forget what Liu Xiaobo said in the closing statement at his trial, that China will, in the end, become a nation ruled by law where human rights are supreme. We cannot give up that hope. Since 1991, the NED has given, as its Democracy Award, a replica of the goddess of democracy, the 33-foot statue that was unveiled in Tiananmen Square a few days before June 4th, to shouts of long live democracy. It was really built to raise the morale of people, which was getting a little bit low toward the end, and hundreds of thousands of people flooded into the square when that statue was raised. And this replica is the work of Tom Marsh. I don't know if Tom is with us today. Is Tom here? Okay, well, Tom is a great friend, a real true Democrat. He is the one who did the other statue that was unveiled today, the Tank Man statue that they had a ceremony on. Frank, there you are. I spoke about you. I said you were great. And we miss you. I want you to know that we miss you. Okay. Any event, this replica that Tom did, this statue was destroyed when the Chinese tanks attacked the protesters on June 4th, but its image lives on. And it has since become a symbol of the universality of the democratic idea. Resembling our own Statue of Liberty, it affirms that democracy is an idea that transcends cultural differences, and it repudiates the notion that some have circulated around town these days, that China and the United States are at odds because of a clash of civilizations. The clash is not one of tradition, religion, and culture. It is about the values of freedom and human dignity. And Speaker Pelosi, who we will hear from in a little while, has participated actually in 9 of our Democracy Award events over the years, and has presented this goddess of democracy to 4 Chinese activists since 1993, to Hang Dongfang, the labor activist to Wang Dan, and Wei Jingsheng after they got out of prison in 1998. And then on the 25th anniversary of Tiananmen Square, she presented our goddess of democracy in absentia to Liu Xiaobo, who was in prison at the time. All of these people exemplify universal democratic values, as do our awardees this evening. Our country was founded upon these values, which is why it is so appropriate to present this award in our nation's capital to freedom fighters from Tibet, from East Turkistan, notice I don't say Xinjiang, to East Turkistan, and China. And it is now my great pleasure to invite Andy Card, who is the chairman of the NED board and a great Democrat with a small d. He was going to introduce Nancy Pelosi, so that was part of the joke. He's now going to introduce Liz Cheney, but Nancy will be here. Andy.
Well, thank you, Carl. And the National Endowment for Democracy is a wonderful organization. President Reagan, with the support of Congress, created the National Endowment for Democracy to plant seeds of democracy around the world. And clearly, the seeds have been planted in places where they need to be planted. And they're starting to bear fruit. But they need a lot more fertilizer. They need a lot more water. And quite frankly, we need some more seeds. Liz Cheney is someone who also knows how to talk about democracy and make sure that people are engaged in it. She comes from a state that was the first state to have women's suffrage. And Wyoming, in I think it was 1869, women got the right to vote in Wyoming. This is the 100th anniversary today of the 19th Amendment to our Constitution being passed by Congress and sent to the states for ratification. Ratification didn't happen until, I think it was August 18th, 1920. So Liz carries a torch for democracy, and she does it extremely well. She's been a phenomenal member of Congress, a relatively young member of Congress. But she has one of the more prominent leadership roles for her party in Congress. She is a significant voice for foreign policy and national security. Before she represented the people of Wyoming as their representative in the House, she was at the State Department. I had the privilege of working closely with her as she was a stalwart of great courage to make sure that we were doing the right things to help spread democracy around the world, and she was the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for the Middle East. In November of last year, Congresswoman Cheney was elected by her colleagues to the role of chair of the House Republican Caucus. That's the 3rd ranking member of the Republican members of Congress, and Ned is honored that she is here today. She has had a working relationship with Ned and the cause for democracy for a very long time. So she is young, but she is very mature in her compassion for making sure that democracy spreads. I'm thrilled to call her a friend, but I'm even more excited to call her a leader in Congress, a leader for women, a leader for democracy, and now she's going to present an award.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. I want to make sure the rest of the room knows that when Ambassador Card said that I was a young member of Congress, Congresswoman Ross Lightnin pointed out that it's all relative here in the halls of Congress. So but I'm so proud to be here today and honored to be part of this ceremony. As Andy mentioned, I have a very long relationship with Ned, longer than I'm almost embarrassed to say because it'll tell you how old I really am. But one of my very first jobs when I finished college was to work at USAID. And I was working at USAID in June of 1989. And one of the first projects we worked on was doing our very best to try to get fax machines into the students in China. And if you think about that, at that time, fax machines were the height of technology, the height of ability to communicate. But those scenes from Tiananmen captured the world. And it is so important for us to be here today, for us to be able to celebrate what happened in the fight for freedom, to remember what happened in terms of the real slaughter and the response of the government of China. And to make sure that every government around the world, every repressive government knows not just America is watching, but the whole world is watching. And in today's world, we see everything. But it has not been just the advent of modern technology that has helped us spread the words of freedom. And I see so many friends in the audience, people like Ken Wallach and Michelle Dunn, both of whom I've worked with on issues and efforts to help promote freedom. We just had the opportunity about a month ago to have a visit here in the halls of Congress from a young man named Enrique Padron, who escaped. He was a boat person. He escaped from Cuba. And when I was talking to Enrique, he came to the U.S. in 1994, and he was a young boy. And I said to him, what gave you courage? What, in 1994, there wasn't internet. And how was it that you knew that you would be willing to risk getting on a boat, crossing shark-infested waters to come to the United States? What was that drive in you? He said, it was Ronald Reagan's speeches. And I said, well, how in the world did you hear those? He said, Radio Libre. And he said, our neighbors, sometimes we would have to put blankets over our head. We would have to tune our radios just right. We couldn't let anybody else know we were listening. But I heard those words of freedom. And it made me know I had to get to that place. And that is the kind of place America has to be today and always. And we have to make sure that those who are fighting for freedom all around the world know that we will always stand with you, that we will always stand on behalf of freedom. We've seen this both continuing in China with the repression that we've seen across the board. And the Chinese government has to know that we fundamentally believe and we know that the rights of man, the rights of a person to be free, those are rights that are inherent. We believe they come from God. They do not come from a government, and they cannot be stomped out by a government. So as we watch across the globe today, you have my assurance as a member of the House. You have the assurance of all of the members that you've seen here. You'll have the assurance this is an absolutely bipartisan commitment, with Speaker Pelosi speaking here as well today. An absolutely bipartisan, ironclad commitment on the behalf of the United States Congress to make sure that we are at all times and in all places standing for freedom. And it is with honor now, I think I'm not giving an award, but our ranking member on the Homeland Security Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, previously Homeland Security, Mr. McCall has come in. I don't want to mess up your program, Carl. Okay, wonderful. But let me just end by saying congratulations very much to the Tibet Action Institute, to the World Uyghur Congress, to Tibet Aid, to those who are here today to be awarded this wonderful memento, and the gratitude. Those of us in the United States who have the blessing of being able to live in freedom really need to stop, I think, every day and remember what it means. And we need to stop and remember what we do in this building. What we do in this building, what we're all going to rush out here to do, to go to the floor of the House, to cast our votes. We get to do that because we live in freedom and because throughout history, brave men and women have fought and died for that freedom. And that struggle and that fight continues today. I know of no more important obligation we have as Americans and as elected officials in the United States than to support those cries and those calls for freedom. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you to Ned. Thank you to Carl, Andy, and thank you so much for having me here. I'm very honored and blessed to be with you today. So thank you so much.
move the program along, Congressman Mike McCall is someone who has been passionate about so many things that impact the ability for us to have freedom and democracy. And he's been a leading national security member of Congress. He's been a foreign policy expert that we've turned to in Congress for many, many years. He served as chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security. Now he's the ranking member there. And throughout his time, he has been a tremendous friend to Ned and the cause for democracy and freedom. Throughout his time, he's also managed to deal with cybersecurity problems and the current challenges that are not just challenges to commerce or privacy, they're challenges to democracy. They're tools of democracy and challenges to democracy, and Mike knows that. So I am thrilled that he is here to help present the first award that we're going to give out. So Ned is proud of the friendship that we have with you, Mike, and we're grateful for your participation and the support that you give us, and you invite us to have bipartisan support, and we do. The board is very bipartisan. The support from Congress is very bipartisan. So I'll call you to come up and present the first award.
Thank you, Andy. I chaired Homeland Security, and now I'm what they call ranking member on foreign affairs, and I really enjoyed that assignment. And it takes me right into this arena with Ned. And Andy, I want to thank you, Secretary Card. As a cabinet member for President Bush 41 and Chief of Staff for President Bush 43, I miss both of them a great deal right now. You've really been, I think I speak for everybody. You've been, we'll talk about that later. You've been a real model public servant for the nation, and grateful for your hard work after the 9/11 terror attacks and your advocacy on behalf of women's rights in Afghanistan and efforts to fight infectious diseases in the sub-Saharan Africa. With the PEPFAR program, which I think truly is one of Bush 43's greatest legacies, is what he did with PEPFAR, saving millions of lives from extinction. 30 years have passed since the brutal crackdown on democracy. Activists in Tiananmen Square, I vividly, personally remember the images of a communist regime attempting desperately to silence the voices of the Chinese people. One image I'll never forget was a very brave man who stood in front of the line of tanks and fearlessly stared down the regime. Although the protests were suppressed and the crowds were forcibly dispersed, those who stood together did not give up their fight. The dream of a better future for China, a more democratic future, is alive and well today. Democracy activists and human rights champions have mounted pressure against the Chinese Communist Party for many years. Their courageous cause has been passed on to new generations who are willing to fight and fulfill that dream. And in fact, we were voting right after this on the Tiananmen Square resolution that I managed on the House floor today, and we're very proud to support our support against the regime in China and for the people of China in that resolution. So our first honoree today, China Aid, and the group's founder and president, and I must say a fellow Texan. Midlander, right? Yeah. Bob Fu represents that legacy. He refused to surrender the dream of a free China, where all religions can worship peacefully. Bob is a noble example to others. China Aid has worked to expose the human rights abuses in China and is one of the loudest voices calling for the end of China's arbitrary and brutal rule. Their mission is to expose, encourage, and equip, and that is to expose the brutality of the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party, encourage others to stand up for the rule of law and the freedoms they deserve, and equip citizens across China with the tools and skills they need to make a difference. While striving to defend freedoms for those still in China, Bob has come back to my home state of Texas, and we welcome you. And let me just say this. We had a great visit in my office about the crackdown on the Uyghur population, the Muslims, the crackdown on the Christians in China, and then the crackdown on the Tibetans in China, all three different religions not able to express their religious freedoms in China. And it's been going on for more than 6 years, and that time has now come. That time must end. And we need to stand up for the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan people. We need to stand up for the Christian people in China. We need to stand up for the Uyghur population, the Muslims, who are literally sitting, as the DOD told me, in concentration camps today in China, about 3 million of them. This cannot stand any longer. But with that, on a more positive note, I want to offer my congratulations to Bob Fu and offer this award to him.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's really, thank you.
Thank you, Congressman McCall, for your unwavering support for freedom. Thank you, Dr. Carl Gershon and NED for recognizing us. We are so humbled and privileged to stand here. I want to also thank my fellow board members. Many of them travel from the People's Republic of Texas, and I became a naturalized citizen over there. But I really want to thank our fellow freedom fighters from other faith communities, from our Tibetan friends, from the Uyghur friends, from Falun Gong friends. When the Chinese Communist Party attacked one group, when we cannot practice faith from one group of faith, none of our faith is free. So when they attack us, no matter it's Christians, no matter it's Catholics, no matter it's Uyghur Muslims, no matter it's the Tibetan Buddhist, none of us is free. And I really, I'm very thankful that today we can join hands together with one voice and tell the Chinese communist regime, enough is enough. I think in the past few days, we already have heard enough words about the atrocities, the inhuman treatment of all the faith communities, the 1 to 3 million Uyghur in the concentration camps, and the over 150 the Tibetans self-immolated themselves. Thousands of Falun Gong practitioners were killed, and over 100,000 Chinese Christians in the year 2018 were detained, imprisoned, and many of them are still in prison today, waiting, or some are waiting for their trial. I think it's time for action. Since we are now sitting in the Hall of Congress, I think instead of naming more names about those who are persecuted, I just want to make one proposal to especially to members of Congress that I think we can make a difference. And my proposal actually will be pleased by both the fiscal conservatives and the progressives, because it does not need to increase any existing funding. It's just need a little bit relocation of the existing appropriation bills. And guess what? The Chinese Communist Party, fear one of the things they fear most is the freedom of information. In 2016, a young man called Zhang Haitao in Xinjiang was sentenced to 19 years imprisonment. For what? He was just a cell phone salesman. He was accused of leaking state secret. When the prosecutor presented evidence, the only piece of evidence was he was accused of forwarding 274 Twitter messages through the Chinese social media. 274 messages through social media. 19 years imprisonment. And almost 10 years ago, another guy from Xinjiang called Alimujang Yimiti, he's a Uyghur and became a Christian pastor. He received 15 years imprisonment. The charge, he was accused leaking state secret. The only piece of state secret for a Uyghur farmer in Xinjiang, or East Turkistan, was he told one of American Christian friends in Xinjiang that he was under investigation. That's the only piece of evidence. 15 years. Because the Communist Party is built by lies after lies. They don't want to know the world to know the truth about their atrocity. They don't want to the 1.3 billion people to know that their fellow citizens had been persecuted. So my proposal is really to ask our member of Congress to help on the appropriation bill to the funding the U.S. Agency for Global Media, formerly known as the BBG, just to change a little bit from that already existing appropriation. And do you know currently how much percentage out of that $770 million annual budget that designated for internet circumvention tools to break the 21st century internet Berlin Wall? Less than 1%. Less than 1%. So my plea and request to our member of Congress is to help, at least, help the BBG, or the agency, and the State Department to raise at least 10%, so that one day the 200,000 Iranians can have their town hall meetings without worrying about being caught, by having the internet circumvention tools that are already available and really existing. So that one day a pastor like me or any other house church pastors can conduct a house church service from Midland, Texas, or Houston, or Washington, D.C., with the 500,000 Chinese house church members worship online together. I think the world will be safer and better and much freer when we tear down that internet firewall of the People's Republic of Amnesia. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joining us for the first time this evening is a member of Congress who has a passion for what we do. And Tom Swazi is from Long Island, New York. I went to Kings Point, so I know your district well, have great friends in Glen Cove. And he's a bipartisan leader on human rights, and he's been working very hard on the corruption issues for a long time in democracy. He's a member of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, the CECC. He's established a record of bipartisanship, and he's the vice chairman of a group that we should all be paying attention to, the Problem Solvers Caucus. And so we're counting on him to lead us to solutions. He's certainly been a strong advocate for the National Endowment for Democracy, and he's going to present our next award. And thank you very much for being here, Tom.
Thank you. Well, after that last speaker, I should start by saying, tear down that wall, tear down that wall, tear down that wall, tear down that wall. I want to start off by saying, let's hear it for the Tibet Action Institute. I practiced some Tibetan today. Are there any Tibetans in here? Raise your hand if you're Tibetan, okay? Hello, Tibetans. Thank you for your work. Oh, did you do that, Andy? What happened to the whole bipartisan thing? I think that we've all believed ever since, since I was a little boy, when Nixon went to China, and since that time, we've always believed that the more the Chinese were exposed to our way of life, to our democracy, to our capitalism, to the Western world, that they would adopt our ideas, that they would become more like us. And that just hasn't happened in any way, shape, or form. And I'd love to speak to you about all these different groups that we are recognizing tonight, but I just want to join with all of you in congratulating one particular agency for the work that they're doing and ask them to come and speak for themselves. Let's hear it again for the Tibet Action Institute, and Laden will come up and accept the award. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Swazi, very much for this incredible introduction. And thank you to the National Endowment for Democracy for this incredible honor and for standing in steadfast solidarity with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and the Tibetan people for decades. In June 1989, I was 13 years old, watching coverage of the students protesting in Tiananmen Square with my father. I will never forget the newfound feeling of hope and possibility that this could be the moment that would change everything. That might mean my dad could go home again to Tibet after 30 years in exile. At that point, Tibet had been rocked by protests for nearly 2 years, and martial law had been declared in Lhasa that March. Just weeks later, seeing 1 million Chinese citizens taking to the streets, it seemed as if change had to be imminent. But that opportunity for change was lost, and not just because of the crackdown, but because in the years that followed, the free world lost its way in holding Beijing accountable. This happened in large part because we started ignoring what this authoritarian power was capable of. We allowed Chinese leaders to hijack critical discussions about rights, muting nearly all public debate, and eventually to even write the terms of engagement. Clearly, we got it wrong, and every day makes it clearer just how wrong. Faced with the escalating crisis of repression today, I believe we must ask ourselves, what can we do differently? The answer lies at the heart of what the students did in Tiananmen Square and what the Tibetans did in Lhasa in 1989. The answer lies in courageous, principled, unyielding action to fight for what is right. If 6 million Tibetans, armed with nothing more than nonviolent resistance, and the Buddhist monk as their leader, can stand up to China time and time again, so can the rest of the world. As they have shown us, we have to speak truth to power, using every tool and avenue available to engage in bold, creative, and strategic resistance. And as part of this, like-minded governments need to confront China as one, engaging in joint public initiatives to support Tibetans and all others fighting for their rights and freedom. We are here today not just to mark a historic moment or because things have gotten so much worse, but because we have to act, to right the wrongs of the past, and to pick up from that moment 30 years ago that was alive with hope and possibility, and this time to get it right. Thank you.
I am not Speaker Pelosi. I'm also not Chairman McGovern. They'll be here soon, I think, and Jim McGovern, who is a congressman from my home state, so he would be the only person in the audience that could understand my Boston accent. But while I'm here, let me talk to you a little bit about what NED is doing. NED is a remarkable organization, and it was founded by, as I said, President Reagan giving a very famous speech, which I encourage you all to go back and read. It's in Westminster. President Trump is over in England right now. Yes, this was a big speech that President Reagan gave, but it was a call to action for the world, all of the world democracies. The people in Congress heard that call, and they passed with a lot of effort a bill that passed with bipartisan support. In fact, it couldn't have passed if it hadn't had bipartisan support. And it created the National Endowment for Democracy about 34 years ago. Carl Gershman has been the president of the organization, and he is the one who has planted the seeds, fertilized the fields, watered the seeds so that they could grow, and he is truly, I'm going to say, he deserves the biggest Goddess of Democracy award. But the board of directors, or the board that manages the National Endowment for Democracy, includes Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, academics and workers, not to say academics don't work. There are diplomats, there are thinkers, and Jim McGovern is here. Jim McGovern, as I mentioned, is from my home state. He's from Worcester. You'll call, if you read it, you'd say Worcester, but he's from Worcester. And Jim has been a real remarkable student of Congress for a long time. He worked for a great member of Congress, Joe Moakley, and that's when I first came to know him. But I know him from his family in Worcester and from the background in Worcester. He's the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. He makes, of the Rules Committee, even more important. He wears a very large ring and everybody has to kiss it. Jim McGovern has been a strong advocate for spreading freedom, making sure justice is done. He's been courageous about doing that long before it was fashionable. And we're proud to have him as a supporter of the National Endowment for Democracy and what we do. And he's going to present our final award. Thank you, Jim, for being here. It's great to see you.
Good to see you. You doing well? Thank you. Well, let me thank Andy Card, who I'm a big fan of. You know, in Massachusetts, Republican and Democrats work together, and something we all need to do better down here in Washington. But I'm a big fan of Andy Card's, and he's been a great leader up in Massachusetts and on the national level, and I'm really thrilled that he's so involved with NED and Cal Gershman. Right there he is. Thank you so much for your leadership. And you know, Andy mentioned I'm from Worcester, and you know that he knows my family. You know, who's from Worcester. A lot of people down here think that because my last name is McGovern that I'm related to George McGovern. And people come up to me all the time and say, I've always been a long-time supporter of your dad's. And I usually say, thank you. My dad owns a liquor store in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I hope you'll keep on supporting him. So, I just see my friend Frank Wolf here, who is, again, a leader and a hero on these issues. There's so many good people here. I just want to let you know, the reason why we're late, we just finished a vote on the bill that I had on the floor today, remembering those who lost their lives in Tiananmen Square and urging the government of China to respect human rights. So we had a recorded vote, and as when I left, it was 423 to nothing. Everybody. So we got everybody on record. So since 2017, the Chinese government has locked up perhaps more than 1 million Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims in mass internment camps. We should know the number of detainees by now, but we don't, because the Chinese government refuses to disclose it. We know these camps are an attempt to stamp out the Uyghur identity. Detainees face daily brainwashing, abuse, and starvation diets. They are forced to denounce Islam, to study Xi Jinping thought, and to sing in praise of the party. Meanwhile, some of their children, left without parents, are made into wards of the state. The Uyghurs living abroad cannot contact families and friends from home, and when those loved ones disappear, they have no way to know if they're living or they're dead. The scope of the Uyghur crisis includes more than these camps, however. Uyghurs on the outside live in what experts depict as an open-air prison, where they are subject to constant surveillance, facial recognition cameras, iris scanners, and police checkpoints. It is long past time for the world to send a clear message that the Chinese government cannot perpetrate these abuses with impunity. The World Uyghur Congress is fighting against this brutal oppression. Their mission to promote democracy, human rights, and freedom for the Uyghur people through nonviolent means can serve as a model for others in the years to come. The World Uyghur Congress has been in the lead in tirelessly advocating to call the world's attention to the plight of the Uyghur people, and in doing so, it has shined a bright light on how this systemic and technologically advanced repression may shape China going forward. As an organization of all the Uyghur people worldwide, the World Uyghur Congress is working to establish a peaceful settlement through dialogue and negotiation. They serve as defender of the identity of their people and an inspiration to others. And so I am pleased to present them with NED's 2019 Democracy Award. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Jim McGovern and President Carl Gershman. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and the congressmen, congresswomen, and all friends who join us today. The World Uyghur Congress is deeply and proud, honored to receive this award to recognition of work advocating for the right of the Uyghur people despite immense challenges. I would like to sincerely thank National Endowment for Democracy. We have made visible progress over the past year despite hard challenges, and this would not have been possible without support of National Endowment for Democracy. I would like to acknowledge the teamwork, World Uyghur Congress leadership, staff, and all those Uyghur diaspora who supports us. I would also like to thank all the academics, journalists, activists whose important contribution have made significant difference. While we are deeply proud and honored to receive this award, we cannot lose the focus. Despite best effort and all progress we had made in the past year, the concentration camp arbitrarily detaining millions of Uyghurs have not been closed. Despite all of our work, Uyghurs in East Turkistan are suffering and being denied and their most basic rights. We are still missing our family, friends, and who have disappeared into the concentration camps today. In this moment, we can celebrate great strides we have made over the past year, but our work is not done. In the coming year, we must redouble our efforts. We cannot stop until all those detained in the camp have been freed. We will not rest until the Uyghur people enjoy democracy, human rights, and freedom. It is a time entire world stand up for the Uyghur. It is a time free for 3 million Uyghur who are suffering in the concentration camp. I think it is a time also US Congress passed, approved the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act. Thank you for your attention.
All right, well, I think everybody knows the situation. We're on the Hill, and Speaker Pelosi is on the floor. And she's trying to get away, and Jonathan Stivers is with us, and he's going to keep us posted on that. But since we have a few minutes, let me just say, it's really rare to gather together a group like we have in this room, so let's take advantage of that while we wait for Speaker Pelosi. I'm told by Jody that there are other things we can do as well. There's some videos we could show, but actually, it gives me an opportunity to say a couple of things, and I welcome that. And I want to say 3 things about each of the groups that we've just honored, each of the causes that we've just honored. I was talking with Bob Fu yesterday, and you told me that at some meeting recently, a Chinese official said that the Chinese regime took great pride, you used the word pride, in the death of Li Baiguang. Who was Li Baiguang? He was a lawyer. He got our Democracy Award in 2008 here in the Congress. He defended the house church movement. He was a devout believer himself. He came and visited the Ned at the beginning of February last year. Bob was there. Then he returned to China, and 2 weeks later, he was dead. And this official said they took pride in that. I think we should take note of that. I think this is what we're dealing with, and we remember Li Baiguang. He was a good man, and he represents, Bob, your cause, which is the cause of religious freedom in China. And on Tibet, I've just, with some people in this room, returned from a wonderful meeting that we had in Riga, Latvia. Riga, Latvia was hosting a meeting of the World Parliamentarians Convention on Tibet. And they did it because they felt they were a captive nation under communism. And now they wanted to help another captive nation, which was the Tibetan people. And at that meeting, Michael Van Walt, who is, I think, known to many people here, especially those who follow Tibet, a great scholar, helped develop the middle way approach. He has just finished a study that he unveiled in Riga that looked at the issue of history. China has said when they cut off negotiations with Tibet, with Lodi Gary, our friend Lodi Gary, when they cut off negotiations almost a decade ago with Tibet, they said they would never speak to the Dalai Lama again until he recognized that Tibet has been part of China since antiquity. Michael Van Walt brought the leading scholars on Tibet together to look at that question. Was Tibet ever a part of China? And they determined a consensus. They determined that Tibet was not a part of China until China invaded Tibet in 1950, occupied Tibet, and then annexed Tibet. They are lying. And in my speech to that conference, I recalled Solzhenitsyn, who said in his Nobel lecture, we must defeat the lie, that violence depends upon the lie. We have to defeat the lie, and we have to defeat the lie on Tibet. And we are going to work to defeat the lie on Tibet. And I just want to note that we are going to be working with friends in Congress and around the world to really mobilize a campaign to say that China's control of Tibet is illegitimate under international law. Illegitimate because Tibet was occupied by force, and illegitimate under international law because they deny the people of Tibet self-determination, the right to a consent in terms of their own future. And that's another thing that we're going to be doing. And then, of course, there is the horrible, terrible issue of the Uyghurs and the Uyghur people. I said in my opening remarks that China is committing cultural genocide against the Uyghur people. And I just want to mention a few names because my staff educates me. I don't know all these names, but they educate me about what's happening and how do you destroy a culture? How do you destroy a people? One of the things you do is you destroy their intellectuals. You destroy the people who are their leaders. And I want to mention 4 names, each in a different field. One of them, I think you know because he just received the Human Rights Award from Freedom House, Ilham Tohti, who's an economist who was arrested 10 years ago. And what is his crime? He's been in prison for 10 years. What is his crime? His crime was to be a Uyghur, was to have a consciousness of being a Uyghur. He wasn't challenging China's authority. He just wanted to be a Uyghur. And he's an economist, a very, very important intellectual, and it's important that we recognize and remember Ilham Tohti today. A second person I want to note, Nuri, you'll know this, is Mohammed Salih Hajim, who was a Muslim scholar. He is the person who translated the Quran into Uyghur. And he was arrested. He's called one of the most influential and respected Uyghur religious scholars. And he died in prison 40 days after he was detained in East Turkistan. He died in prison. He is dead now. This scholar is dead. So they've destroyed a religious scholar. Then there's a woman, an academic, by the name of Raheel Dawood. Have I said it correctly? Yes. Raheel Dawood. Okay. She's a very distinguished scholar. She was going from Urumqi to Beijing in December, I think it was, of 2017, and she disappeared on the way. And she has not been heard from since. She is now on the list, Scholars at Risk has taken up her cause. She is, in a way, a disappeared person, this important Uyghur scholar. And then there's a fourth person who's a folk singer. Let me see if I get this right, Nuri. Abdurrahim Hayat. Yeah, okay. All right, he's a folk singer, an important Uyghur folk singer. And in February, the Turkish government announced that he was dead. And the Chinese came out with a video saying, no, he's not really dead. Do we know his fate? Nuri? You think he's alive? Do we have any evidence of that? All right. But the point is, what is he in prison for to begin with? This folk singer, what was his crime? This is how the Chinese government is trying to destroy the culture of the Uyghur people. And we cannot let that happen. We cannot let that happen. We have to do everything we can to speak up. And even though the Turkish government has made a few noises, let's face it, there has been a deafening silence in the Muslim world. And Saudi Arabia, that murders journalists, justified this oppression, this killing by saying it was the way China was fighting terrorism. That is outrageous, and we, people like ourselves, and we have to reach out widely, have to raise this issue and have to mobilize support all around the world, and especially in the Muslim world. And we're going to do that. We connect with people in the Muslim world through our work at the NED, and we are going to do that because this cannot be allowed to stand. This kind of terrorism that the Chinese government is committed against the Uyghur people, against the Tibetan people, against the house church movement, against human rights lawyers and others. I mean, this, as Liu Xiaobo said, this represents a threat to our security. This is not just something happening far away, because China is developing significant military power. It's developing, through the Belt and Road Initiative, ways of penetrating. Pelosi will be about 10 minutes. I'm not sure that I have 10 minutes more to say. I have a feeling for 10 minutes more, but I might repeat myself. I mean, we could have a discussion. I mean, you want to break? All right. Well, look, we can take a break. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I just want you to know we're here for a purpose. As I said, this is not just an act of remembrance. We're here to show solidarity, and we have to go from here. We have to go from here to do everything we can with all of our networks, everything that we do in our writing, to mobilize solidarity and support for the people who are under such terrible oppression, because it's the right thing to do, and it's also in our country's national interest. Thank you.
Carl, can you stay here and we'll put the three up to a group photo? Right here.
I feel like I'm at the best rally ever.
Thank you, Paul.
You guys are great. Thank you.
You are great. You are great.
Yeah.
You are the best. Look at me. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
If everybody could take their seats or find a position to stand in, the Speaker of the House is on her way. I can't whistle. Hello? Everybody find your seats, please. Thank you.
We are so fortunate to have the Speaker of the House here. I mentioned before when I started that this is the 100th, literally, this is the day of the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution being passed by Congress and sent to the states for ratification. The personification of being a suffrage envoy is Nancy Pelosi. She is someone who grew up in politics with a passion for participation. She made sure the we in our Constitution does apply to everyone. She was an outstanding public servant who became a congresswoman, who became a leader, who became a speaker. And she's been a committed advocate for human rights. She has been passionate about that which the National Endowment for Democracy does. For many years, she's been one of the most vocal members of Congress on issues such as Tibet. And she remembers Tiananmen Square and won't let anybody else forget it. She's been among the most reliable friends of the National Endowment for Democracy. And we are honored that she is not only here today, but she has been there every time we needed her to be there to help. She gained her leadership in part because of her partisanship. But she's been leading us in helping to spread democracy with no partisanship, with an invitation for everyone. And she has made sure that invitation is active every day in Congress when it comes to the work of the National Endowment for Democracy. So with that, we are grateful for the trust and privilege that she has shown us, and we show her great respect. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House.
Thank you all very much. I really appreciate those very kind words of introduction, especially coming from Andrew Card. He is, Mr. Chairman, he is a respected leader in his own state of Massachusetts. You can still detect the wonderful glow of his Massachusetts accent. And he is, again, on the other side of the aisle from us, but on the same side of all of the issues that relate to the dignity and worth of people. I was so delighted when I heard that he was willing to take the responsibility at the National Endowment for Democracy because his reputation is so magnificent on both sides of the aisle, both sides of the Capitol, up and down Pennsylvania Avenue, and all over the country, in Texas too. Right? In Texas, too. So thank you, Andy Card, for your kind, very, very generous and kind words, which I accept on behalf of my colleagues. As Frank Wolf will tell you, we always did all of our work together in a bipartisan way. We were bipartisan in what we advanced. We were bipartisan in precedents we criticized of both parties in what they didn't do. And I'm excited to be here. Carl Gershman, thank you for your tremendous, tremendous leadership. You would think at some point he might burn out, but he just keeps glowing. He just keeps that flame going about his passion, his ardor for, again, respecting the dignity and worth of every person all over the world, wherever they are. For all of us, it is a challenge to conscience to see what the Chinese government did 30 years ago. What a sad thing, really, behavior outside the circle of civilized human behavior. Some people are here. I was reminiscing with Werkashi. He has his Uyghur name there now, but Werkashi, when we met him. And when he came back he came right after it happened, like a matter of, it seemed like days to us. He was testifying in Congress. Remember, Frank, and Chris Smith was there, bipartisan way, Tom Lantos had the hearing, and he came, this boy, really, he tells me he was 21 years old, but a young person of college age, so much courage. And when he came to the Capitol, and others came with him, but he was sort of one of the names that we all knew, the cameras were ablaze. The whole world understood what happened. And the courage was just so dazzling of all of these young people. Now, today we have many veterans of Tiananmen here, all of whom demonstrated that courage, all of whom command our respect, all of whom, each of whom has taught us a lesson about courage and not forgetting. So I couldn't be here earlier because we had two things simultaneously interwoven on the floor. We had the Dreamers Bill, that was very important to many of us. And then in between the Dreamers Bill, they decided to take up the vote on the 30th anniversary commemoration resolution. And so I couldn't move because I wanted every single vote. Everybody said, well, you have a majority. You can leave now. I'm not leaving. You have 2/3. You can leave now. I'm not leaving. I want the message to be clear that the House of Representatives voted unanimously every single vote, and they did. And they did. And they did. And again, I accept that on behalf of all of my my colleagues. Ileana Roslet, my girlfriend, I'm so glad she's back here. My girlfriend, she knows I miss her, but she knows how hard it is to get 100% of the vote for. Right, Frank? You too. Because the Chinese government, they were threatening me all day. I can just imagine what they were doing, the embassy, with the rest of the members. But 100% of the vote saying, we remember. We will not forget. The Congress, the House of Representatives, it was great. So here we are. So here we are, a challenge to the conscience of our country, a challenge to the conscience of what, 30 years ago? How could it be? In some ways, it seems so recent. In other ways, it seems so 3 decades away, a long time. But the just reemergence of so many people at this time. I guess, as I said today at the rally, the 30 years should be a sufficient evidence that the policy that our country has adopted toward China in the hopes of getting better trade policy, better security policy, and better human rights policy simply hasn't worked. And we might want to try a different approach. So it's very interesting to think that we saw at that time, 30 years ago, before some of you were born, all of these, a million in Tiananmen and there and all over China, all of these young people coming forth, supporting our founders, having a goddess of democracy that looked like our Statue of Liberty, and then to have that snuffed out. Several years later, the Chinese invited me as speaker to come in shall we say, let's redo our friendship, because for all those years they were saying I was the most hated person in China. So I wore that as a badge of honor. And in any case, they said, let's reset our friendship. So you're gonna come, Speaker of the House, and and I said, we'll go and we'll talk about climate change, because that was someplace where we had common ground. But I said, you can't expect me not to talk about human rights. It just isn't possible. But why I bring it up is because on the way over, we had all this reading and film and all the rest of it. And what was so sad, because that was like, what, maybe 10 years ago? What was so sad about it was that, it was 09, I guess. That was so sad about it was that the man before the tank, one of the most iconic visuals in the world, and all that it symbolized was totally unknown to the students in China. When some people ask them, what does this mean to you, holding it up, they say, oh, is that a commercial for something in America? Is that a commercial for something in America? It's a commercial for democracy. It's a commercial that we're with the man before the tank, not with the man who ordered the tanks out. But imagine that they have completely eradicated that image. Maybe now with more social media and the rest, that some of that will be made known to some people there, other than the people of Hong Kong. And aren't we proud of them, the way they turned out? So in any event, I just want to share some thoughts with you, because this is a very emotional thing for all of us. I don't think anybody went back more than Frank. He was in the prison, Beijing prison #1, seeing what they were doing with prison labor. I mean, we were so, and have been and continue to be, so close to this issue, and we thought we were going to get some cooperation if we could prove, and Frank did prove, that what they were doing was wrong, but we couldn't convince a Democratic or a Republican president to agree with that. So in any event, just to say that we remember the Uyghurs, what, 3 million is it? Where? About 3 million in education camps? What? And why is the world not speaking out? We have to. And I've said to the people in the Muslim world, these are your Muslim brothers and sisters. You've got to speak out. The Tibetans, so sad, their religion, their culture, their language, trying to snuff that out. In Hong Kong, oh my gosh, so scary. extradition legislation, which puts everybody there at risk. One country, two systems. What two systems are they? None of them is acceptable in terms of how they view democracy. And with journalists, lawyers, authors, human rights activists, and all the rest, so at risk in Beijing and throughout China. So it all is still happening. It's getting worse, I think, than even when we visited China that year, and then when we visited Tibet recently under this current President Xi. It seemed worse than even under President Hu. So we have important work to point out. This is a challenge to our conscience, and as I said over and over again, if we do not speak out for human rights in China because of an economic relationship, we lose all moral authority to talk about human rights any place in the world. So Dr. Bob Fu, the Tibet Action Institute, World Uyghur Congress, Dalton, is that? To London Tathong, yeah, just Tong, Tatong. Congratulations. Congratulations, congratulations, congratulations to all of you. I have that goddess of democracy, and I display it with great pride in my office. Thank you, Thomas Marsh, for uniting us all with that beautiful, beautiful statue, and that it comes to you from the National Endowment for Democracy is such a great imprimatur. There could be none better than to say what a champion you are, how we all globally recognize that. Thank you for your courage. Congratulations on the recognition.